Hello and good evening all. This is one of the constituent component videos of the 5 cars that barely got off the ground compilation, posted for data analysis purposes to determine which car will get a deep dive video in the future. For those of you wondering which video performed best out of all the 5 cars that never got off the ground videos, it was, perhaps unsurprisingly, the Ford J car, and I think that for that, I'm actually going to start working on a larger overview of the GT40 and its many variants, as I think the J car requires more context than some of the other vehicles mentioned in that video. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy. This thing was a damn mess. That's about all I have to say about that. But seriously, after the relative success that Aston had had with Lola chassised cars in the B08 and 09/60, the latter which was more commonly called the DBR1-2, and with rule changes approaching that would require significant changes to both the car's rear aero and its power plant, the team decided to get cozier with their good friends over at ProDrive and build a new racing car from the ground up. With a target readiness date of February 2011 to be eligible for the International Le Mans Cup, design work started almost immediately after final project authorization. In autumn 2010. 6 months, chaps. Good luck. Enjoy the holidays. Fortunately, Aston had some technology on their side that meant this insanely compressed time schedule might just be feasible. Just. Almost the entire car was designed on the latest computer programs. In Aston's case, a suite of software from PTC that was capable of designing, drafting, and simulating tests of the car's aero and mechanicals. They also had access to ProDrive's enormous 3D printer, which they leveraged to rapidly prototype new components for the car. ProDrive was responsible for the chassis build this time, instead of Lola, in addition to their regular relationship with Aston for building the rest of the car after the mechanical components and chassis had arrived. And they went against the general trend, designing and constructing an open-topped car with a carbon fiber chassis noted for a relatively high belt and fairly monolithic carbon fiber bodywork that was informed by CFD work that they had done in the design stage. Airflow was prioritized to minimize front downforce and thus a bevy of duct-directed air into the body rather than over it, emphasizing cooling across the likely speed regimen. Zoomability came not from a production-derived, naturally aspirated V12, sadly, but from a substantially smaller 2-liter turbocharged straight-six unit that Aston developed to keep in the spirit of the efficiency focus the ACO was pursuing at the time. This power plant's 540 horsepower went to the rear wheels through an X-Track-sourced 6-speed sequential manual in a custom housing. The suspension was at least slightly interesting, as they featured a third symmetrical damper for better road holding. Off the cuff, if memory serves, Peugeot tried this with the 960 or the 9X8 as well, but I could be wrong. And as usual, everything weighed in at the class-mandated 900-kilogram weight limit. With 2 chassis constructed and 4 more planned, Aston spoke highly of their hopes for the car in the lead-up to the 2011 season, with the AMR chairman quoted that it was elegantly engineered, and that he expected it to be a competitive and reliable endurance racer. But then they missed Sebring as they were still testing, and barely had one car ready for Le Castellet, where it made its race debut, qualifying last in LMP1 and nearly 6 seconds behind the fastest qualifier, Giuliani's Rebellion, that was actually in essence an updated version of the chassis that Aston had been running previously in their closed cockpit days. And Le Castellet is not a very long track. The car was also the first retirement in race from the LMP1 class, but it did manage to complete more than half of the race distance, albeit not very quickly. The team then skipped Spa to focus on private testing after a dismal showing at the Le Mans Test Day, and at this point I can't well say that hopes were high for a successful run at Le Mans, particularly when faced with the prospect of a resurgent Audi with their resplendent new R18, Peugeot's redeveloped 908, and their more likely rivals in older Lola and Pescarolo machinery. In spite of these relatively low expectations, qualifying at Le Mans was even worse. The 2 cars were ready for qualifying, but the faster of the 2 was mid-pack with the LMP2s, and the slower was even further back. The only other LMP1 that was as far down the order split the two Astons, but it was an experimental Oreca hybrid that was coming in a year earlier than the hybrids from Audi and Toyota, and the aborted Peugeot we talked about last time, and so, it's kind of fair that it would be struggling a little bit on pace. Aston has no such excuses as far as I'm concerned. But even the forlorn hope of a miracle was hardly a hope at all, and both cars were retired within the first hour, both seeing engine issues that was traced to the plasma vapor disposition coating on the cylinder liners, which certainly sounds, Star Trek-y and impressive, but still, 2 cars out within the first hour of Le Mans is embarrassing. They withdrew from the next round at Imola, intent on further testing, and then went quiet until Silverstone, when they showed up with their older Lola coupes. And the new year brought the perhaps unsurprising announcement that they would not be continuing a prototype development program, instead pivoting to focus on their much more successful GT cars. With several chassis that had been constructed just as tubs left over, one went on to serve as the basis for the slightly longer-lived, but arguably as unsuccessful Delta Wing, and 2 more went to Pescarolo for their final LMP1 design, which was equally as unsuccessful and had only marginally better results in its 2 races, benefiting at least from a more developed and thus more reliable Judd power plant. Driver Darren Turner attributed the car's poor results to the rushed nature of the program, which makes sense, but at the same time, the Pescarolo's similar failure the following year may also belie inherent flaws in the design itself. LMP1 was really hard in those days.